to our Keep Indiana Learning Who's Who and What's New in 2022 live stream event. We are so thrilled that you are joining us either live or after the fact, watching us on demand. I'm so excited to be here with two special guests. I'm Lena Darnay. I'm one of the professional learning specialists here at Keep Indiana Learning. My focus is on digital learning, and I do a lot of content for online learning, both professionally and when we're working with schools, how to integrate technology into the classroom in an innovative space. And I'm joined today by Maggie Paino and Nate Walden. Maggie, will you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I'm Maggie Paino. I am the Director of School Accountability with the Department of Education. I've been doing the job there for about 9.5 years, and I'm really happy to usher in the new year here. Yeah, let's do this.
All right, Nate?
Hi, I'm Nate Walden. I am an instructional design specialist with 5 Star Technology Solutions. So we work with schools all over the country on helping them innovate their classroom teaching. I spend a lot of my time developing self-paced courses for teachers to take in professional development. That's become more popular than in-person professional development in the last couple of years for obvious reasons.
Yep.
So we're developing those self-paced courses for teachers. I also have my hand in the Indiana Learning Lab, which is another resource that we offer for Indiana teachers to help them innovate their teaching practices.
Well, thanks, guys. Thanks so much for being here. We are so thrilled to be part of the InLearning Partnership, which is a partnership for professional learning with Keep Indiana Learning, the Indiana Department of Ed, and 5 Stars Learning Lab. So this is really that trifecta of talking about innovation. Our topic today is to share a little bit about where we're seeing innovation, where we're hoping that we're going to go, our dream for the future, and some of the ways that you, as fellow innovators in the classroom, in the buildings, in the district, and education, can join us on this journey. Now, Maggie, I have to say, when you were coming into the innovation sphere and you're talking about like data assessment, tell me the truth. Are we assessing in any innovative ways lately?
Well, yeah, let me say, usually when people want to talk about innovation, they go right past my office and head to the fun things, not the, the stickler of accountability. But I will say, Indiana is really starting right now to see and realize some shifts that are happening just generally, not necessarily within academics, but also economies, changes of way people live, and acknowledging that students have different needs today than they did when I was in high school or elementary school. And that's a great thing, and we're starting now to see that impact in accountability and starting to catch up with some of the great things that you all are doing in the classroom and acknowledging the whole student. We're acknowledging that on the accountability side. So yeah, it's been great. One of the big projects that the Department of Education has been working on over the past few months is the Indiana Graduates Prepared to Succeed framework, which will inform how we look at and measure success in schools. And it's so much more than just one test score. So we're really excited about that. And we feel like we are starting to be innovation leaders, dare I say. You guys are going to be stopping at my office now instead of walking on down to the cool flashy ones with the cool billboards, and you'll stop in my sterile walled place with zeros and ones all over the wall. So,
well, if there's a space in education that is ripe for innovation, change, adaptation, movement, it is in accountability. Because as Nate, I'm sure you have been figuring out, when you're doing all this online teaching, online learning, online professional development, and then you go back to kind of the classic standard way of accountability, they don't match up.
No, they don't. That's what, when you're working with teachers and you are trying to get them to try new things, to try new innovative practices, almost immediately their first pushback is usually, yeah, but, and then they point to whatever that standardized test is that they know is just at the horizon. And they go, but that's not what's going to be on this test. I got to get my kid ready for the SAT or the iLearn or the iRead or whatever they're thinking. And I mean, it's our job as professional development leaders to get them to see the connection of how these innovative practices are going to help them to be critical thinkers, and that's going to help them on whatever that standardized test is. That's true, but their nervousness usually is, I know what that standardized test is going to look like, and if my teaching practices don't model that close enough, that somehow that's going to prevent my student from being able to do well on that piece of accountability. And so it's great to know that Indiana is looking to move beyond that or build from that to provide a different avenue to measure success, I guess.
Yeah, that's really exciting. And Maggie, from your point of view, are we following or are we leading in this accountability changeover?
Yeah, I like to think of us as leading. I can think of no more than 3 states, so one hand worth of states that are shifting their accountability in this kind of direction of looking more at a whole student. So yeah, I feel like the work that we're doing is really kind of leading the country and the nation in shifting away from just looking at test scores and graduation rates and really starting to look at more skills, experiences, the students' needs, and making those more of a prevalent focus at the state level. And not just the student, the teachers and the community, and making sure everybody realizes that this is a partnership across the board at all levels, and that's how we're all going to succeed.
I think that's key. And one of the things that I'm very passionate about as a former school librarian at the high school level, I worked all the time with authentic, relevant learning tasks and trying to bring in CTE. I worked on developing a CTE program at the high school I was at. And it is so essential that our skills that our students leave with after our pre-K to 12 experience have relevancy and immediate application, not just at a liberal arts 4-year college, but in the workforce, as a career trade, as an apprentice, an intern. Are we seeing a shift in application of like CTE style application accountability? Talk to me a little bit about what that looks like.
Okay, so you'll see that my colleagues here are really well dressed for the new year. I am not. I mean, I'm in a sweatshirt.
You look great.
Thank you.
Yes.
Your top hat's awesome.
Thank you very much. But yeah, I mean, I may have this is just like how I live. I've decided sweatshirts and jeans is just the only acceptable way to move forward in life at this point. But Mickey Mouse, hang with me here, okay?
I'm here. We're here.
Can you guys?
I'm with you.
Okay. Mickey Mouse. Like the basics is Mickey Mouse. Always there, always existing. How is Mickey Mouse innovative? And anyone have any ideas on how?
Steamboat Willie, first ever cartoon, full-length cartoon animation.
First, right? Yeah.
I would also say he's like ever evolving with the culture of his time.
Yes.
Steamboat Willie Mickey is not the same as the Mickey you're going to get today.
True.
Today we got Mickey and Pals on TV, which makes my dog tear up our furniture. But like, Mickey Mouse always changes with the times, and accountability was not doing that. And our programs of how we were measuring them was not in alignment. So what we're seeing now is Mickey is taking over accountability and saying, get with the times, folks. You got to evolve. You've got to acknowledge that we need to start looking at these programs in a different way. So it's kind of filtering down now of seeing like, hey, as we're looking at these students and preparing them to succeed, we have these characteristics of academic mastery that we need to focus on, but we also have characteristics of college and career readiness, work ethic, communication and collaboration, and literacy in financial, digital, and civic education. So we're looking at this more holistically because we have evolved in where we are as communities, and how we carry out those programs to satisfy all of those characteristics is really what's driving accountability. Or driving that steamboat into the 21st century.
Can I ask you, do you think right now schools are doing a good enough job connecting the CTE programs with what we might consider like the core subjects or the traditional academia, like your math, your social studies, your science, your language arts, foreign language? I mean, when I was in high school, our CTE courses were literally in a different building. Yeah. They were
Right.
physically separated. And now I think most schools you will find they're almost always in like a wing by themselves. But it's not like the social studies wing that's like just right around the corner from math. It's literally like you probably have to walk past the cafeteria and the gym to get there. And I think a lot of the core subjects could learn a lot in instructional design or in how to develop your course by looking at the CTE courses. Because the one question you're almost never getting from a student in a CTE course is, why do I need to know this? Like the application is in your face at all times, which is a lot of times missing from the core subject. So are schools, in your experience, moving towards a better integration between those, or do you think they are still too separate today?
I think yes, I think there's definitely growth for putting that into perspective. And in fact, we love having CTE teachers come in to Keep Indiana Learning and showcase some of their strengths in making very relevant, connected learning in their classroom, so that we do have some cross connection. Because you're right, typically these CTE programs were built after the school was built, so they're an add-on for the actual physical space, or even the hiring is that workplace specialist, right? They had experience.
A lot of them also probably have equipment
right,
needs
right.
that do, I mean, you can't
the
have
HVAC
the shop.
repair. Yeah, exactly.
You can't have like, or your ag department, maybe
Yeah.
you can't really be that close to the foreign language classrooms. But I think we can find a way to cross-curricular bridge that. I mean, when we think of cross-curricular, we're usually thinking of how can we get, you know, the social studies and language arts courses to kind of maybe have a cross-curricular unit, so they're talking about thematic things that are the same. But I don't think when we think cross-curricular, we're bringing in the CTE courses.
Yeah, right. And I think, so I love the Twitter hashtag Career Tech Ed. Hashtag Career Tech Ed. There's some amazing Twitter chats going on, lots of really vibrant conversations going on these days about innovation within CTE because of the pathways that are going on in a lot of our states. They really are embracing CTE as it's almost like a flashback, right? So it's like the motorcycle jacket was cool back in the 60s and now it's cool again, I sure hope. Because those things that are tried and true and tested, that's where we see innovation. Or the reason why Flashback to Steamboat Willie is so easy, because that's a classic, iconic idea. And SHOP, which my grandfather back in the 50s taught SHOP, he was the one that was doing career tech ed, because typically you did go straight from high school into the workforce. And now we're seeing that come back around, and especially with the Great Resignation, we've got people changing careers. So I would even love to see some career tech ed opening its doors to those adult learners who are wanting to take a shift in careers, because goodness knows we need more people in the culinary arts, we need more restaurant workers. That career has really shifted, and we need to have more of that understanding of where we're going. It doesn't look like the restaurants of even 2018 these days. The ideas of how we're doing curbside and delivery and, you know, ordering online, the innovation for the online learning. Now I have to put that into play when I'm trying to order my pizza, right? Like, is this a user-friendly way to order my pizza and get it delivered to me? And I didn't have to talk to a single person. Like, we're really shifting the whole career space, and education's got to follow along. What are you seeing in online learning for teachers especially?
Well, I mean, as we know, the last couple of years, many teachers were, I mean, I guess all teachers were forced into accepting at least elements of online learning. We could not meet in person. From an instructional design perspective, I mean, the foundations of what makes a quality course or unit or even lesson, they're essentially the same. You know, you need to have clear objectives, and then you need to figure out how you're going to assess whether those objectives are met, and then you plan the learning activities around those things. That, whether you're meeting face-to-face in person and everything is in a physical classroom, or you're learning online, that's the same. What we've seen over the last, I mean, really 10 or 15 years, and I think Indiana really led in this area too, was that moving to one-to-one, moving to blended learning. I think Indiana was ahead of many states. Indiana was in a better position when the pandemic hit than I think many states were, because that had been a focus that we'd had for a while. There were, you know, some teachers that were slower to adopt some of those blended learning practices, but good or bad, they were forced into it, and now if there's a positive to take away from being forced into that remote learning for so long, is hopefully you don't, now that we're starting to get back in the classrooms, you don't throw out everything that you learned from that experience. If I were still in the classroom, I would want, obviously, to be back face-to-face with my students.
Sure.
That's what we want. But did you have to start assessing your students differently during the pandemic? Could you just give a multiple choice chapter test? I guess you could, but were you able to make sure the students weren't just Googling every answer from their home? Probably not. So were there better ways to assess? Were you forced to ask your students to apply their skills instead of just recall their information? And what positive things did you see from that? And can you now take that and bring that into the physical classroom space with you? The framework for how to design lessons, I think, is the same. My personal favorite framework is Understanding by Design. It follows, Jay Victai is another great follow on Twitter. And it just follows a very strict backwards design approach of what do you want them to understand, not what do you want them to know, and those things are different. Like skills and fact recall are important, but what do you want them to be able to do with that in the real world? So it always starts with what do you want them to understand, and then how are you going to assess them on that? And it needs to match. Don't assess them in a way that doesn't match what you said you wanted them to understand. And then you design your learning activities to get them to a place where they're ready to perform.
Right, I love those performance tasks. I mean, Jay McTighe is wonderful about putting out really clear ways to develop the performance as part of the accountability, because if you can use it, then I know you learned it. But if you can just regurgitate it, I have no idea if it's stuck.
And and there's a better chance that you're going to remember it. We've all done it as students. We had a test coming up that we knew was going to be basically fact recall, and we crammed the night before. Yep. And then you go on summer break and you come back and you don't know any of it because you didn't have to use it. You didn't have to perform with it.
Well, and I know you were a former social studies teacher, so don't take this as a stab in the heart, but I tell you, all those names, dates, and facts of the pre-Civil War, I don't remember them. The only ones I remember are now in Hamilton, so I can sing you songs about them. Right. But I couldn't have told you those before because and I got an A in my social studies classes.
But to that point, if you are a social studies teacher and you are giving these assessments that are asking people to give you the date that the Civil War started, I would take a step back as an instructional designer and say, why? Why is that question on your test? Ultimately, why is that important for you to know? And what maybe is more important would be the causes of the Civil War and how that carries forward. What were the effects of the Civil War? And those are things that are important. Those are things that a student might need to know. We always talk about learning from history so you don't repeat it and all of that sort of thing. The date that the Civil War started, maybe is important, but that's why you start with truly what do you want them to understand, not just know. So I would argue that, again, I'm just getting on my social studies soapbox. I don't know if I ever once actually asked a question on a test that was date related. I was by no means a perfect social studies teacher, but that was just one thing that because I knew as a kid, that was the worst part.
I tell you, they have the difference between a Trivial Pursuit test, right? So what would give me those trivial knowledge to only pull out once a year when we play Trivial Pursuit, or those things that make me better in a conversation, and as I tell my 11-year-old, get more jokes, right? So when you have those big references and you understand what people are talking about in a big picture way with those related connections, you get better jokes and you have better chance of having
I like that
conversation.
Trivial Pursuit analogy too, because I read an article once and I wish I could tell you where and who wrote it, so I can't give any credit for it. But we as teachers, we always talk about the depth of knowledge and the 4 levels of the depth of knowledge, and that level 1 is the Trivial Pursuit. It's the fact recall, and teachers know that, but I think frequently always kind of struggle to remember what kind of tasks fit into what level of depth of knowledge. And so the article did a great job of using game shows essentially as a way to explain it. And it was like Jeopardy would be the level 1. And we always look at the Jeopardy winners as the smartest people on the planet. And they're very smart, but what they're good at is recalling random facts.
Right.
And then the next level, I'm going to mess this all up, but the next level is something like Top Chef, which was very skill related. What flavors go well together, what textures go well together, and now I'm going to challenge you to create this this dish or whatever. And then the highest level was like the Shark Tank. It's the you're coming up with learning things and then being able to create a completely new idea from it. So I like that Trivial Pursuit analogy, and that's kind of what reminded me of that particular
I'm pretty
article.
sure it was Eric Francis.
Could be.
So at Maverick EDU, shout out. He was also a Keep Indiana Learning speaker for In the Lead. So we've got some content online with that. But he really goes into those depth of knowledge, how they relate to a game show. It gives us some very concrete examples that make it a little clearer, because sometimes that, accountability and assessment is tough. Like,
And
we
not
just
every
don't know.
lesson can be a Shark Tank lesson. So
Yep.
that's what I
You
liked
gotta
about the
build up to
particular
it.
article was like, yeah, there's going to be times when you need the Trivial Pursuit or the Jeopardy, because they can't do the Shark Tank unless they know the Trivial Pursuit or the Jeopardy. So I liked the way that he framed that. Is the goal is to at some point push your students up that depth of knowledge chart, but you've got to get the foundation first.
One thing I was going to mention about, you were kind of talking about the classroom approach of, building out the lessons and what ultimately focusing on what you want them to learn and then assessing that is parallel to what we do in accountability. And one of the things that really hinders innovation and accountability is lack of ways to measure it. How do we measure certain things? How do we measure success with a CTE concentrator beyond just saying they passed a course?
Right.
How do we get at the deeper levels? How do we get from the Jeopardy to the Shark Tank through measurement tools? And that's a struggle that really hinders innovation in accountability. And it's taking time, but I feel like we're getting there as a state and hopefully motivating others. But it does take time, and I think that's something to consider too. I think everybody in our world today is like, we need it now and we need it changing immediately. And some of these things take time. You have to build projects and programs, and you have to figure out what works and what doesn't. Trial and error is a big deal. And that's what we're doing right now with accountability. There are a lot of things that we see as important that we want to measure. We're figuring out how we measure it so we don't have to continue to rely on one summative assessment to capture all of the intricacies of what's going on in the classroom.
Yeah, and I guess when you think about it, what the state in that situation is struggling with are the exact same things that a teacher is struggling with when assessing in their classroom. It's, I want to ask my students to use their knowledge and perform a task, and I want to be able to assess that instead of the traditional true-false multiple choice. But that's so much faster to grade.
Right.
And I've got 160 students or whatever, or the state is would have to wrestle with those same things, I would think. Like, wouldn't it be great if we were able to assess in this way, but now you're introducing elements of subjectivity. Multiple choice tests are very objectively scored, and time. There's a lot of students in the state of Indiana, so the struggles to figure out how to best hold students and teachers accountable is the same struggles that teachers are dealing with. That one factor that is always the big gatekeeper is time. Teachers only have so much time.
And I think that as we're moving into 2022 and beyond, one of the things that has been really popping up is this use of innovative technology for things like assessing and grading. So some AI work and making spaces where we can help get there faster. And so it's that balance. And I think our next conversation, what's new for 2023, might be about how much we are outsourcing to AI versus keeping that personal attention, and how much we're just hanging on to because we think it's always been done that way.
Right.
And that's going to be the big shift. And I think that brings us to talking about why there is Tupperware on our tables. This classic idea of not only something that still works. So mine is about 1973, I think, is when Grandma got this one. You said yours was more like...
Yeah, it was probably in the 60s or 70s, and it sadly broke on my way here. That's how old it is, and it smells like crayons for some reason. I think that's what Tupperware ends up like after a while.
And then yours is...
Mine is relatively newer.
I know, but what's the thing on the top? That's what I love. There's your innovation on Tupperware.
Yeah.
So it's the freshness sealer, basically. You push it so that it gets as much of the air out, so you can keep things fresher longer.
I think that's perfect. And that really sums up, we were laughing about how innovative we are. Also inside mine is Grandma's Classic Recipe for Chex Mix, which I found out this weekend is just the recipe on the box of Chex cereal. We thought forever it was this like guarded family secret. And then I called my aunt to ask what Grandma's recipe was. And she was like, oh, it's on the back of the box. So sometimes there are classics you don't have to mess with, but you can innovate once there is a solid foundation of research, tried and true strategies and practices. And I think our conversation about assessment and accountability in the innovative space has been amazing.
Yeah. You know, one thing to think about is what goes inside the Tupperware too. And I see these cookies that I hope I get to eat.
Sure. Yep.
You know, everything that goes into those cookies is the same basic staples. You have flour, eggs, sugar, butter. It always is the same base for any cookie. And I think that that's important when we think about how we innovate is with students, we always need to make sure that those basic elements are present for them to succeed and for us to have something that we want to eat, that tastes good, that can succeed outside with, you know, at a party that people want to take them off of the tray. We want that for our students. And so making sure that no matter what we're doing with innovation, we need to make sure that those basic needs are met for our students before we can really move forward and build on top of that foundation. So that's, to me, the broken Tupperware is not the innovative thing in my world. It's what goes inside and how we can then take that cookie and make it really fancy, have crazy icing on it after we get the basic staple in there. How we can add cranberries, or we can use different flour. We can make it gluten-free. Yes, sir, I can say that again.
Well, and to kind of piggyback off of that, the sort of analogy that I was also going for here is that I actually made these. That's why they kind of look a little rough. But I tried to find you know, those really, really soft cookies that you can get. There are sugar cookies that are really soft. They have that kind of thick layer of icing on top. And those are my favorite. And so I tried to find a recipe to do that homemade. And they turned out all right. But the analogy I was trying to pull here is to tie in with instructional design is for a long time, I think a lot of teachers relied very heavily on the design of their course to come from their textbooks. Mm-hmm. And as textbooks are becoming a less and less important part of the classroom now that we've moved to one-to-one, you know, the textbook and the teacher used to be the gatekeepers of knowledge in a classroom. The students had no way to access information outside of the teacher and the textbook. And now that we've given most of them a device that has the answer to every question ever asked on it, they don't need the textbook as much. But designing a unit completely from scratch is time consuming for teachers. And so you've got to make the decision as a teacher, where do I want to put my time? And so sometimes you're going to go for the store-bought design. Sometimes maybe the textbook lesson is really solid and you can rely heavily on the supplemental materials that came with it and create a course or a unit around that. But sometimes it's worth it to do it yourself from scratch because you know your students, you know their likes and their dislikes, and you know what they need, and your textbook doesn't. So the more you can have your hand in the design, I think the better. Acknowledging that sometimes you're running late for the party and you just need to go to the store and grab the cookies that are already made. So using your time wisely and knowing when it's homemade is the better option and when store-bought's the better option, I think is important to think about.
I love that analogy. It's a perfect way to wrap up our time together. Thanks everyone for joining us on this live stream. We are sponsored today by Terrace Metrics, and we are thrilled to have them as a sponsor to bring a lot of this live stream action to you. Thank you both so much, Maggie, Nate. This has been a great conversation. Yep. I hope to see you more in the new year back here, Keep Indiana Learning, and with some of our in-learning partnership activities. Thanks everyone. Thanks for joining us.